Hi, welcome to the Arcade School. I'm Randy Fromm. During this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at video game conversions. Of course, in a video game conversion, we're taking an older game, a game that's perhaps working but no longer making money, and converting it into a new money-earning video game. Well, the process is really pretty simple. Of course, we need to change the computer board itself. When you get your conversion kit, there will be a new computer board in the kit that you'll install in the game. And naturally, we have to change the graphics as well. The graphics on the side of the cabinet won't reflect the new game that you put in. Also, we'll have to do some work on the front of the game. Not only on the graphics, which again are graphics for the older game, but we will also have to rework the control panel to replace the joystick and the buttons so that in your new game you have the proper controls. There are three phases to doing a video game conversion. One phase is to do the actual electrical work, that is, installing the new computer board, installing a new power supply if necessary, and wiring up the coin door and the monitor and so on. Another phase is actually rebuilding the control panel, putting in the new joysticks and the new buttons as necessary to operate the new game. And another phase is working on the cabinet itself. For instance, the side graphics on this old game are nothing like the new game that we plan to put in. So we need to do something about that as well. Also, your old cabinet may be damaged and you may have to repair that damage. Let's start by working on the cabinet. Let's start off by fixing a hole. This is a typical hole from a video game cabinet that sustained damage out there in the route. Start by taking some small pieces of 2x4, or in this case I've used PVC tubing, and lay them down on the floor. This will prevent the side of the game from being damaged. Here we can take a close look at the hole itself. To fill the hole, use ordinary body filler. This is plastic body filler that you can get at any auto parts store. Sometimes goes under the name of Bondo. Get a small piece of cardboard and use a plastic spatula to remove the Bondo from the can. It's a good idea to use this in a room with a lot of ventilation because it does smell bad. Make sure you use plenty of Bondo. It's always okay to have a little bit extra. Then use a small amount of the resin hardener. The instructions on the can will tell you how much. Generally it's about 20% hardener. Now you'll notice that the hardener is a different color. This is important because it's important to mix thoroughly. You need to mix the hardener thoroughly with the auto body resin. And now just fill up the hole with the mixed resin. You have to work fast. This will set up in about 5 or 6 minutes. Just fill the entire hole. Don't worry about slopping a lot of extra on there because we're going to take any excess off later on as soon as it hardens. Better to add too much than not enough. Make sure you get all the air bubbles out. After it hardens in about 10 minutes, you can start to shape it. Use a small rasp and start gently. It only takes about 10 minutes for this resin to harden. And you can see how easily you can cut it down. We've already started to make a good dent in it. And then just finish it off until the Bondo is flush with the cabinet. Use a sanding block and some medium grit sandpaper to make the surface smooth. With a little bit of spray paint, you can make it almost invisible. But if you really want to do a great job on the side of your game, Formica is the way to go. It costs about $60 to Formica the side of the cabinet. Start by laying the Formica sheet on the side of the video game cabinet. Leave a little bit around all the edges. Leave about 2 or 3 inches around all the edges. We're going to trim that off later. Use a pencil to mark the edges so we can rough cut the sheet of Formica. Next, use a Formica cutting knife or a plastic cutting knife to score the Formica sheet. Just use any straight edge. This just happens to be an old piece of aluminum angle iron we had laying around the shop. Make sure that you score the sheet deeply so that it will snap cleanly. This type of knife works much better than a regular old box cutting knife. When the Formica sheet is scored, it will snap just like that. Comes off very easily. Warning, the following scene may disturb some viewers. Close your eyes and I'll tell you when to open them, because this is what happens when you're not careful with the freshly cut Formica sheet. It's very, very sharp. So be careful when you deal with the cut Formica. Okay, you can look now. Grab a couple of sawhorses and a piece of wood, because we're going to move the Formica sheet over to the side so we can apply the glue. But before we apply the glue, we want to remove the T-molding that surrounds the edge of the game. If we're going to go through all the hassle of replacing the sides, the Formica sides, we might as well install new T-molding as well, because it will make the game look very nice. Next, grab a can of contact cement and your magic Folgers can. More about the Folgers can in just a minute. This is just ordinary contact cement that you can get at the same place that you purchase your Formica sheet. The Folgers can is important because we're going to fill it with a solvent. And Randy, will you turn the can around and show us that this is lacquer thinner? Open the can of lacquer thinner and pour a few cups into the can. This is the neat secret to applying contact cement for Formica application, because if you dip the paintbrush in the Folgers can first and then in the contact cement, it automatically thins the contact cement and prevents little balls from rolling up as you brush the contact cement on. Brush a thin layer of contact cement, dipping it first in the lacquer thinner and then in the contact cement, and then applying it to the side of the game. It's a very, very thin coat. In fact, it's so thin that when it dries, it won't actually feel sticky to the touch. Another advantage of the Folgers can with the lacquer thinner in it is that when you're finished with the paintbrush, instead of trying to clean the contact cement off of it, all you have to do is throw the contact cement laden paintbrush in the can with the lacquer thinner. Put the lid on, it will be all ready to use the next time you need to apply Formica to the side of the game. Next, apply the glue to the back of the Formica sheet. Again, dip it in the lacquer thinner first, followed by dipping it in the contact cement. Now here's a real neat trick. Before you lay the two together, lay some strips of doweling, or in this case again they're the aluminum angle iron strips, across the game. The reason for this is that once the two sheets touch each other, that is, once the Formica sheet touches the side of the game, it's stuck forever. By putting the dowels across, you can position the sheet before you let the two touch. Position the sheet with a few inches all the way around the outside edge. Again, we're going to trim that off later on. And then, one at a time, remove the dowels and push the Formica down onto the game. Start from the middle and work your way out. And push the air bubbles out as you go. Next, use a hard rubber roller to push the air bubbles out and apply the Formica to the side of the game. The roller will be available at the same place that you get the Formica. Now we want to trim the Formica, and we'll use a router to do this. You need to get a flush trimming bit. The flush trimming bit will cut the Formica sheet flush with the side of the game. And now we have to apply the T-molding. The T-molding will fit right in the slot. It's called T-molding for obvious reasons. Use a rubber mallet to tap the T-molding into the groove in the side of the game. You'll have to cut a small notch in the material where it enters the groove as it makes the turn around the corner of the cabinet. The cut doesn't have to be precise, just a small slit in the plastic material right where you bend it around the corner of the game. With the new Formica and the T-molding installed, your game cabinet will look fantastic. Well, the next thing we want to do is start on the electrical hookup. This is the old power supply. We're going to get rid of this power supply because we're going to put in a new switching regulator power supply. This type of power supply is universal now for all games. Here's the old power distribution area where we find the power transformer and the capacitor and the fuse holders. These are the fuse holders right here. There's the capacitor and the power transformer. We're going to leave those in place, although we won't be using the entire power distribution center. We're also going to leave in place the speaker wires because we want to connect to those later on. Start by disconnecting and removing the old power supply and the old logic board. Well, here's the old wiring harness. We want to remove just about all of this. The only thing we're going to leave in place is the AC power distribution to the monitor and the marquee light, and the speaker connections. Start by removing the clamps that hold the old cable to the side of the game. We'll use those later on. The connectors come apart quite easily. Just pull them right apart. We'll be using some of these connectors later on as well, so don't throw them in the trash just yet. Now remove the old mounting hardware, the mounting hardware that came with the original game. When you do your conversion kit, you will find new board mounting hardware included in the kit. And now is probably a good time to vacuum out the inside. It really helps to have an electric screwdriver when you do a conversion kit. Your next step is to screw the power supply into the side of the game. Just use a couple of wood screws or even sheet metal screws, any kind of screws will do. And do the same with the logic board. Well, the next thing we want to do is connect up the wiring harness. And the manual that comes with your conversion kit will tell you how to connect up each pin or each wire of the harness. We use a standard harness for all conversion kits these days. It's called the JAMA harness. It stands for Japanese Amusement Machine Manufacturers Association. You may see one of two different types of harnesses that come with the game. You may see a black connector like this, or you may find a blue connector on your game. I prefer to use the black connector, which is a Molex connector, because the individual pins on the connector are much easier to remove on the Molex connector. It's easy to identify the pins on a JAMA connector. On the part side of the board, each pin is numbered, and on the solder side of the board, each pin has a letter designation. By using the standard JAMA connector, every game is connected the exact same way. For instance, the first two pins on each side of the connector are for ground, and we'll connect all four of those wires to the ground terminal of the power supply. The next two pins on each side are for the plus 5 volts, and again, that will also go to the power supply unit. The next pin is for minus 5. Pin 5 and on the opposite side of the connector, pin E, are both used for the negative 5 connection. You may find that that is not always used. Some games use minus 5, some games don't. Pin 6 and pin F on the opposite side are for the plus 12 volts. Likewise, those will be connected to our power supply. Well, now let's connect our power supply to the board. Here's a real handy tool. This wire strip will not only cut the wires all at once, but will also strip 4 or 5 at a time. It's available at most electronic stores, even Radio Shack. We'll start by connecting the +5 and the ground. You'll notice that there are 3 or 4 wires for the +5 volts. You need to connect all of these wires to carry adequate current from the power supply to the logic board. Twist all 4 wires together and crimp a terminal on the end. Even though you've made a thorough crimp, I think it's a good idea to solder the power wires as well. So I also solder the wires on the end of the terminal. This power supply has 2 ground terminals, so I'm going to connect 2 pairs of ground wires to the 2 ground terminals of the power supply. If you don't have terminals, you should at least tin the ends of the wires before attaching the wires to the power supply. This will keep frayed ends from shorting out to adjacent terminals. Then just connect each of the terminals to the appropriate terminal of the power supply. To get the AC input power for the power supply, many people pick off where the power enters the monitor. But there's a better place. Down here on the power supply chassis is a switched 117 volt AC output that we can tap into to obtain the power for our power supply. Strip back a little of the insulation and splice the AC power wires for the power supply onto the existing AC wires. After soldering, use some black electrical tape to insulate each of the wires. Be sure to check with the electrical code in your particular city. After tinning the wires, connect each of the wires to the appropriate terminal on the power supply. The green wire goes to the frame ground or FG connection. Black and white are interchangeable, and they go on the screws marked AC 115 volts. Well, the next thing we want to do is hook up the video output from the computer board that brings the color signals into the monitor. Well, here's the old video wires that came off the monitor, and we're just going to cut those off, throw those away. And here are the new video wires that come from the computer board. We're going to splice the two together, so we need to cut these off about here. Always leave a little extra and strip the wires back. You can see what a time saver this tool is. Next, we want to strip the wires back that come from the video input of the monitor, just like that. Now we want to join the ends of the wire that carry the video signal from the computer board to the ends of the wire that feed the monitor. It's pretty easy because these video wires are usually color-coded. In this case, they're yellow wires with red, green, and blue stripes, so that's pretty simple. Well, here's one with the red stripe, so we're going to connect it to the red wire, which comes from the red video output of the board. But before I do that, I'm going to slip a piece of heat-shrinkable tubing over the end of the wire. That will allow us to insulate the wire. And splice the two wires together using what's known as a Western Union splice. Do that for each of the remaining wires. Here's the yellow wire with the blue stripe. Don't forget to slide the heat shrinkable tubing over it. If you connect them first and then remember to slide the heat shrinkable tubing on, you'll have to cut them apart and reconnect them. And here's the green wire, and that will go to the yellow wire with the green stripe. Of course, the wiring colors are different in different games. Generally, though, they will use red, green, and blue wires. Now we have two more wires. One is the video ground, and the video ground is usually a black wire. In this case, it happens to be a solid green wire. We're going to connect that to our video ground, which is the black wire that comes from the logic board. And that's really standard in all connections, in all conversion kits. And then finally we have one more wire. It's a white wire, and it's called the sync wire. Sync short for synchronization. The sync wire keeps the monitor synchronized with the computer board. Keeps the monitor from rolling as if you had to adjust the vertical hold control, or from shifting left and right. There's our video wires, and now we're going to simply slide the heat shrinkable tubing over each of the connections. After soldering each wire, use the match to shrink the heat shrinkable tubing over each of the wires. Let's take another look at the monitor connectors. Most monitors use a 6-pin connector and a smaller 3-pin connector. Pins 1, 2, and 3 are for the red, green, and blue inputs. Pin 4 is the video ground, which is connected to pin 14 on the JAMA harness. Pins 5 and 6 are not used. These are positive sync inputs that were used in older games. We use an additional connector, a 3-pin connector, for negative sync. Pin 1 is also a video ground connection. You may use either pin 4 of the 6-pin connector or pin 1 of this 3-pin connector. Pins 2 and 3 are for the negative sync inputs. Try connecting the sync wire from your conversion to pin 3 first. Turn the game on. If the picture rolls, you will have to put a small jumper between pins 2 and 3 of the connector. If the picture is fine when you fire it up, leave it that way and operate it with only pin 3 connected. At this point, we should now be able to plug in the game and see a picture on the screen. Well, next we're going to connect the speaker, and here's the two speaker wires that we left in place. Remember, they go up to the speaker that's in the game. So let's strip those back. And slide our heat shrinkable tubing over the ends. Here are the two wires that come from the JAMA harness. I'm going to leave a little extra room there because we want to be able to make a nice, neat cable out of these when we're all finished. Strip the ends back here. And again, we're going to splice the ends together. With the speaker, it really doesn't matter which end goes where. Although you may find that on some connection diagrams, one speaker connection is labeled positive and the other one is labeled negative. It actually really doesn't make any difference at all. And then we'll solder the wires. Make sure that you do not slide the heat shrinkable tubing up until this is cool. Otherwise it'll shrink on you. Shrink the tubing with a match just as we did before. We now have just 3 sets of wires left. 2 are for the control panel, player 1 and player 2. And the third one goes to the coin door. Well, now we're going to wire up the coin door. But since the coin door is already wired with this nice neat harness and a nice neat connector, I'm going to salvage the connector off of the old harness to use in our new game. I don't have to use all the wires that come off the harness, just the ones that go to the coin door. So I'm going to cut off the wires that I don't need. Be careful that you don't snip the wire. Just cut off these tie wraps. We're going to be taking a look at tie wraps later on, and we'll see how nice they are to use because they make your conversion look nice and neat. I don't have to cut back very far. I'm just going to use a little bit of the wire because we're going to splice into it for connecting it up to our new logic board. Now here's the coin door wires, and there's a coin door ground. Then there's 2 coin switch wires. One is for coin switch 1 and one is for coin switch 2. Most games can use either coin switch wire, unless your game is such that the right player uses the right coin slot and the left player uses the left coin slot. I just use one of the wires. I just use coin switch number 1. So let's strip back the wires for coin switch 1 and the ground. Now you can easily see by looking at the coin switches that we have 2 wires here. There's a yellow one and an orange one. So we're just going to take the orange and the yellow wires here and we're going to splice them together so that we end up with just one coin switch input. I'm going to twist coin switch number 1 and coin switch number 2 together. Now don't forget, slide your little piece of heat shrinkable tubing over it before you solder it on. And then I'm going to splice it to the blue wire that comes from our new logic board. Now, of course, there's also the ground, and that's the black wire, and we're going to connect the ground as well. Strip the ground wire back. Again, don't forget your heat shrinkable tubing. Slide the heat shrink over the wire. and splice the two black wires together. It's always important that you solder the wires as well as physically splicing them together. So let's solder them. There's our ground, and there's the two coin switch wires. Remember to let the wires cool before you slide the heat shrink over them. Slide the heat shrink over this one, slide the heat shrink over this one, and then use your match to shrink the heat shrinkable tubing. Later on, we're going to dress these wires and put them in a nice neat bundle. Now, what about the other coin switch wire? Well, here's a neat thing you can do with conversion kits. If the conversion kit is not going to be using both of the wires, you can save this one as a spare. If the game gets hit by static electricity and the coin switch wire fails to operate, that is, it's blown out the integrated circuit on the logic board, coin switch 2 may still be working. So leave this wire up here, and we're going to tie it up together in a nice neat bundle. If at any time coin switch 1 input stops working properly, you may be able to switch over to coin switch number 2 and use this input instead. In addition to the coin switch wires, there are a couple of other wires on the coin door connector. These wires connect to the lamps that are in the coin door. If your coin door is equipped with lamps, it's a really good idea to connect them up. Strip the wires back. And splice a couple of new wires on. Don't forget to put the heat shrinkable tubing on. Of course, if your game is already wired with coin door lights, you should leave these wires intact. However, very often the power that comes from the power supply, the original power supply in the... Oh, see there? I was talking and I forgot to put the heat shrinkable tubing on. Very often the wires, the power that powers the coin door lights does come from the original power supply, and since you're changing power supply, you're going to have to rewire the coin door lamps as well. Let's do a quick solder job on these guys. One. There's the other. Cool. Yes. Slide the heat shrinkable tubing over. I know it seems like I'm making a big deal out of this heat shrinkable tubing, but it's really great stuff. And if you're the kind of person that uses black tape to insulate all of your splices, you ought to look into getting heat shrinkable tubing. It's not very expensive, and it really makes a much more professional job of things. Now we need to connect the coin door lights to the power supply. And different people use different connections. Some people use the -5 volt to power just the coin door lamps. Others use the +5. I used to use the -5, and then I found a large number of power supply failures where the -5 volt output diodes in the power supply were blown. So now I use the +5 output. Well, right now it seems like we have a pretty big mess. There's all kinds of wires going all over the place. So before we go any further, and before we connect the coin door lights up to our power supply, let's neaten up our wire harness a little bit. And what I'm going to do is put the connector, the cable ties back in that were in there originally. And we're just going to use a tie wrap to tie our cables to these existing clamps. Now, if you've never used tie wraps before, these things are really handy because all we have to do is bundle up our wires slip the tie wrap through the anchor point and pull it tight just like that. And now we can complete our coin door lamp hookup by cutting the wires off, stripping them back. Put lugs on if you have them, or tin the wire with a soldering iron if you don't. And then connect them up to the ground and the +5. That's all there is to it. Here are 4 different coin meter circuits. Just about any coin meter requirement can be met by using one of these circuits. This is the connection for games that utilize a coin meter output. In other words, games that are using the standard JAMA connections, which have coin meter connections at pin 8, which is the meter that activates with coin switch number 1, and pin J, which is the meter that activates when we use coin switch number 2. If you use this meter drive feature, use just one of the coin switch inputs as I discussed earlier, and use the corresponding meter output. For example, if you've connected both of the coin switches to coin number 1, connect the meter to coin meter number 1 output. The other pair of connections can be saved as a spare in the event that the meter drive circuit fails. This next hookup works for just about everything. Even if a game does have a coin meter output, quite frankly, I rarely use it. It's just another circuit that can fail and cause a service call. Instead, I usually hook up the meter directly to the coin switch. When the coin switch activates, it not only signals the computer, but activates the coin meter as well. This circuit is for meters that use +5 volts. To drive a 12-volt coin meter, you must add another diode as shown in this diagram. The additional diode prevents the +12 volts at the coin meter from entering the coin input of the board. Connecting a +12 volt meter without this diode will damage the logic board. Games that have separate coin mechanisms for each player should use a coin meter circuit like this. In this case, the diodes are set up so that each of the 2 coin switches are isolated from each other, preventing one coin from crediting both players, while still driving a single coin meter that adds the total coins from all the players. And now it's time to work on the control panel with a little help from Brett Hurst, America's favorite coin-op mechanic. Start by removing the control panel from the game. Remove any connectors that connect the control panel to the remainder of the game cabinet, because we're going to remove the control panel and work on it on the bench. Also remove any hardware that attaches the control panel to the game. And remove all of the buttons. We're not going to use any of the existing hardware. Remove the buttons as well. And we're going to discard those because we're going to put all new buttons in. And now we're ready for the next stage. Remove the hinge and any other mounting hardware that's on the control panel. If you want to remove the overlay, a hot air gun really makes it a lot easier. By getting the old overlay nice and hot, you can peel it off much easier than if you tried to do it cold. Next, we want to mark the plastic overlay. We can use the control panel as a template. Plexiglass can be scored with the razor knife. And then snapped to break it cleanly. We're going to use some of the existing holes in the new conversion, so we're going to mark those with a pencil so that we can drill out the plastic overlay. Next, we're going to mark the plastic overlay so that we can locate the extra buttons. Make the buttonholes 2 inches on center. The button is 1 7/8. Next, use a circle cutter to cut the hole in the plexiglass. To drill the holes in the plexiglass overlay, you should use a special plexiglass drill bit. The plexiglass drill bit is designed to go straight through the plexiglass without breaking it out. If you try to use an ordinary drill bit, you run a substantial risk of damaging the plexiglass overlay. The plexiglass drill bits are available from Craftix, 2701 North Pulaski, Chicago, Illinois. The phone number is 312-235-3307. Be sure to ask them for a complete catalog of all their products because they have a host of other plexiglass tools as well. After the plexiglass overlay is complete, we'll use it as a template to mark the holes that we need in our metal control panel. I've made a small plexiglass template that helps me mark the center hole. We're going to use a green leaf punch to make this hole, so we need to start out by boring a pilot hole for the punch. Here's the Greenlee chassis punch. To use the punch, simply put one side of the punch on one side of the control panel and thread the other half of the punch on the other side. Use a large crescent wrench or other large wrench to spin the die. Remember that although Bret Hurst is America's favorite coin-op mechanic, he's not necessarily America's strongest coin-op mechanic, and if you have a big enough wrench and you're strong enough, this actually goes pretty fast. When the punch finally pops through, it does make a nice, clean hole. Another way to make a hole in a metal control panel is to use a hole saw. A hole saw can also be used to make holes in wood and plexiglass. But if you're going to use a hole saw on a metal control panel, make absolutely certain that you use cutting oil, or at least 3-in-1 oil or some other household oil. And the oil will really work. Cutting oil is better because it doesn't smoke as much. If you do not use oil, you will destroy your drill bit. Well, there's the hole, but it's not nearly as clean as the hole that we made with the Greenlee chassis punch. Now it's time to apply the overlay that comes with the kit. Peel off the protective backing. This is just like any other contact paper. Apply the overlay to the control panel, pressing out as much of the air as you possibly can. Always try to fold the overlay completely over the edges. This keeps people from picking at the edge of the overlay and removing it from the game. Use the roller to remove any trapped air bubbles. And use a razor knife to cut out the excess material from where the buttons and joystick are going to go. Well, now it's time to mount the new controls, and I can think of no better example of a control panel than the control panel from the Dynamo cabinet. We'll be taking a closer look at the Dynamo convertible cabinet later on in the film. The base of the joystick mounts directly on the studs that are pressed into the control panel. Lock nuts hold them in tight. Be sure to tighten all of these nuts with a nut driver later on. This Dynamo control panel was configured especially for Street Fighter II. Because Street Fighter II has so many buttons on it, Dynamo went ahead and made a special control panel just for that game. But the universal control panel that comes with every Dynamo game will fit just about any common game that you might encounter on the market today. Hand tighten all of the buttons to start, and then use a wrench after all the buttons are in place. And there's our control panel. The next step is to wire it. And Dynamo has made this job a lot easier. Included with each Dynamo cabinet are wires with these push-on terminals. This makes wiring the control panel a snap. Start by wiring the ground to each of the micro switches. In every conversion kit, there's a continuous ground wire that connects one end of each micro switch. Pick a logical starting point, like this joystick. Start at one end of the control panel and work your way around. Make sure that you don't miss any switches. The ground wire connects to the terminal marked COM, which stands for common. The ground wire is connected to the common terminal of each switch. If you don't use push-on terminals, you do need to solder each ground wire, which is a much more time-consuming process. The Dynamo cabinet makes this unnecessary. Because of the push-on clips, it's very easy to connect each switch. Now we'll connect the PC board inputs. Each switch, up, down, left, and right on the joystick, and the fire and shoot and jump buttons on the control panel need to be connected to the input of the computer board. And once again, we're using the push-on clips. The push-on clip connects to the normally open connection on the switch. On the micro switch, you'll see one terminal marked NO. This is normally open, and this is where the input wire goes on each switch. The normally closed contact will not be used. Well, here are our joystick wires. We've got these wires, and we've got all these other wires as well, and it's kind of a mess right now. There are even some extra wires that Dynamo provides for future use that we're not using in this game. So we're going to tie them all back. We don't want to cut them off because we'll save them for future use. And let's just use a tie wrap to bring them into a nice neat loop, and we'll save those for future use. Next, we want to dress the wiring harness to make it a lot neater. And again, we're going to use tie wraps to do this. First, sort out the wires in some kind of a logical pattern, like bundling all of the buttons together, or the buttons and one joystick all in one bundle. One bundle for left player, one bundle for right player. And use a tie wrap to bundle them all together. What starts off looking like a giant mess ends up looking like a very professional control panel. Naturally, you want to snip off all the excess material from each tie wrap. But tie wraps do make a nice, neat bundle and a very professional job. The final step in assembling the control panel is to mount the joysticks. Of course, this is a very simple process. Simply remove the E-clip from the end of the joystick rod and insert it through the base of the joystick that you've already mounted on the control panel. Insert the actuator, any bushing that might be in place, and replace the E-clip. Our Dynamo control panel is now completed and ready to install on the game cabinet. Well, if you've just done a top-to-bottom video game refurbishment and video game conversion, you've just spent about 6 to 8 hours. But here's a fantastic alternative to conventional video game conversions. Dynamo makes a universal convertible game cabinet that already contains a monitor, the power supply, and the pre-drilled control panel for any modern video game. Well, this is a fantastic alternative to spending hours installing Formica and repairing cabinets and so on. As long as we're looking at the back of the cabinet, let's look down here at the power supply. This is a computer-type power supply with a detachable AC power cord and a built-in fuse and fuse holder. There's also a cooling fan that assures reliability. The monitor is located back here, behind this service panel. This shouldn't have to be opened too often, because all of the adjustments are reachable from the front of the game cabinet on a detachable adjustments board. With the panel removed, we can see inside and look at the Wells Gardner 25-inch monitor. This monitor comes with a 1-year warranty from Wells Gardner. The Dynamo cabinet comes complete with a plexiglass marquee and the universal control panel, as well as the standard over-under coin door. Although this cabinet is set up for Street Fighter II, the standard Dynamo cabinet comes with a universal control panel. The coin door conforms to all the AMOA standards for coin doors in our industry and includes a large cash box. Also mounted just above the cash box is this small service panel, which contains the volume control, a service switch, and a test switch. One great feature of the Dynamo cabinet is this drawer slide that can be interchanged from game to game. In addition to making it easier to install the kit, the slides can be moved around between cabinets. This makes game rotation a snap. After completing the control panel, all you have to do is mount the printed circuit board on this drawer slide and connect the built-in JAMA connector. The Dynamo cabinet makes it a joy to do a video game conversion with professional results that you can really be proud of. Well, that's about it for our look at video game conversions. You can see they're not really very difficult to do. The important thing here is to take your time. Take your time and do a really good job. It takes about 6 hours to do a total, complete, dedicated video game conversion. Remember, what you're trying to end up with here is a game that looks like a brand new game, like it just came off the factory showroom floor. It's not supposed to be an old game cabinet with just a different game in it. It's supposed to look like a brand new game. Well, that's all the time we have for now. So I'll see you next time at the Arcade School. Bye-bye.
Thank you.